Now, our second speaker is Felicity Lawrence. Felicity is the Deputy Director General of Science and Capability at New Zealand's Department of Conservation. This means that she's a civil servant, but I don't hold that against her. And in fact, I think it's visionary that your department, Felicity, allows you to take part in conferences like this. And I'm not sure that that would happen in the UK, so good on you. And Felicity is going to talk to us about conservation, not just for survival, but for prosperity.
Goodness, perhaps I'm a threatened species as well. That's very interesting. Thank you very much, Baroness. And thank you, Sarah, for your great context, which I think you'll find we're all on the same page. And kia ora tātou to everyone else here. As a good docker, issue a very warm welcome to New Zealand, and I hope that the conference is an enormously successful initiative. Certainly the ability for us all to have conversations is exactly what we need to do, so that's great to see you. As I've read in the program for this conference, I've been really inspired by the array of speakers who are discussing their experiences and successes with partnerships and using innovative approaches to appeal to new audiences. This is not just for the purpose of having new people engaging with flora and fauna. It is about the value people place on all our endeavours. That is also the Department of Conservation's challenge. How can we create a world where people of all colours, creeds, demographics, shapes, sizes and fitness levels recognise that their lives depend on the health of the natural world and take action to maintain it? DOC has a vision that sees New Zealand as the greatest living space on Earth. We actually really wanted a vision that was about restoring the greatest living place in the galaxy, but we didn't think that our mandate really stretched that far. But we all together can do that. As it is, this vision is much bigger than DOC and bigger even than conservation. It's a 100-year vision for the future of all of New Zealand, which acknowledges that conservation, protecting and enhancing our special places and species, is a key part of a sustainable and prosperous future for New Zealand, and we hope the world. So if that's the vision, what's our current state? The conservation status of all known 2,600 New Zealand Indigenous vascular plant taxa was reassessed in 2012 using the New Zealand Threat Classification System and published this year. That assessment found that more than 10%, i.e. 289 taxa, are threatened. Nearly 30%, 749, are deemed to be at risk. More than 80% of them are endemic to New Zealand. If we lose them, the world loses them. Given the historic land clearances, current land use practices and continual pressure of introduced pests, we have had to ask, can the Department of Conservation do something about every plant that is under threat? Do all those threatened plants occur on conservation land? And if not, are they all protected or managed elsewhere? Quite simply, the answer to all of those three rhetorical questions is no. The problem, of course, is not DOCs alone. But, putting that aside briefly, what does DOC do for our in situ botanical heritage? In the last couple of years, DOC has begun to put in place its new monitoring and reporting system for measuring ecological integrity. It is building a network of about 1,300 ecological monitoring sites throughout the country. When it is fully in place, nearly 270 monitoring plots will be reviewed annually so that every plot will be visited every 5 years. The data collected will represent a major milestone to help DOC improve management and biodiversity outcomes. We know that where we do work, we make a difference, but we can't properly manage that work if we don't measure the result. With the government and partners increasingly focusing on results, it's important that we ensure that we are able to report accurately on this aspect of our work. Most of the management sites are on public conservation land, but some threatened species or rare ecosystems exist only outside public conservation land. DOC is working far more closely with landowners who wish to protect and preserve these places. Like you, we are also working on education initiatives and community projects which engage people of all ages and skills in plant restoration, and we'll discuss this at more depth in a minute. The Department of Conservation manages approximately 30% of New Zealand's land mass. Don't ask about the EZ, it's much, much bigger. We have a mandate to be the guardians of New Zealand's natural heritage. DOC is working in the spirit of kaitiakitanga, the Māori word for guardianship. This ties in well with DOC's vision statement for New Zealand to be the greatest living space on earth. However, this is not about public conservation land alone, and we are not the guardians alone. We already work with iwi, local government and communities to accomplish great things for conservation. The problem remains, though, that everyone in New Zealand needs to recognise their responsibility and act on it together. As a country, New Zealand has a great opportunity to be a truly sustainable country. A place that is the best it can be, a country that prospers socially, economically, and environmentally. But this is a concept that is still not well understood. This vision is a stretch, and it will take a lot of energy and creativity, hard work and enjoyment, but in the end, our children's lives probably depend on it. So that's where partnerships come in. Since early September, DOC has realigned itself to reflect the concept that nature is an integral part of economic and social well-being. DOC has made a number of major structural changes to reflect the need to enhance community and business commitment to conservation for everyone's benefit. Our previous structure implied that DOC's responsibilities halted at the park boundary, and so too did conservation. But DOC cannot and should not do this alone. Here in New Zealand, it's easy for people to point to DOC and say that conservation is our issue. But our view is that conservation is everybody's business. Of course, DOC will still do the bulk of the work on conservation land, developing, prioritising strategies and continuing to do the hard yards that the track face. Our task is to demonstrate to more sectors of the community that the plight of rare plants is not just DOC's issue, or yours for that matter. But together we can improve the chances of survival of rare species in a collaborative role, often with very little effort. Partnerships are the way forward. For DOC people, this can be a challenge. We are passionate and we have a tendency to think we know best. We'll be right by ourselves, thanks very much. But that view is not viable. It's a time for collaborative thinking and action. Starting with possibility, conversation and questions leading to involvement in decision-making improves commitment to actions. People are generally more collaborative when they're working on joint goals developed together. Better decisions are made than can be made by one person or organisation alone. DOC is moving from the model on the left to the model on the right, away from being terribly certain about most things to recognising that diverse individuals and communities hold vital perspectives that, if shared, create the foundation for new and innovative solutions. We are seeking to move away from father knows best and away from being sniffy about others who we deem to know a little less than or us or in a different sphere. I have a feeling that we might have actually even thought that about botanical gardens, and if that's true, I'm terribly, terribly sorry and culpa. This model comes from Stuart Brand, his book on the clock of the long now, Time and Responsibility. It was written in 1999, and in some ways we are only just beginning to explore the second road. It is a challenge for all of us, but it is in a post-ish GFC world where we all have to do more with less, and unilateral action is not taken too kindly. It is an essential shift to make. And I hope that during this conference we'll have many conversations that lead to questions, and I hope co-design that in fact builds the community, and it seems to be doing so internationally. The good thing is that we are getting somewhere. In the early days of the restructuring of the department, we developed a commercial business unit as one way to cut through the inherent bureaucracy in a government department. DOC developed relationships with some industry leaders who have warmed to the idea of business and community wellbeing, as well as enhancing their bottom line outcomes. Fonterra and DOC are working on both sides of the farm gate to make a difference to water quality and the environment in these 5 areas. As part of Fonterra's Living Water initiatives, they launched a 10-year investment that will initially focus on the 5 key catchments in significant dairying regions. Quality waterways are pivotal to maintaining healthy environments which protect native wildlife and also underpin a sustainable dairy industry. It makes perfect sense for DOC to be working with New Zealand's largest dairy cooperative to improve water catchment health, although some people might not agree with that. Using its expertise in conservation and biodiversity, DOC is working with Fonterra, local communities, iwi and farmers to build on the good progress made by Fonterra's catchment care program. This project is a stretch for us all. Previously wary of each other, we have come to understand a lot more about each other's businesses and the values that drive them. DOC has been accused of selling out to big business, but we stand firm in the view that if we can help companies like Fonterra value healthy ecosystems and see the link between them and successful business, we'll have helped to deal with the root cause reasons for ecosystem degradation. In many ways, New Zealand is behind other parts of the world in this endeavour, but we are small and we can make great strides if we get the right people in the room together talking purposefully. Recently, DOC's co-sponsored a conference in Wellington entitled Valuing Nature, based on the principles of economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, or TEEB. TEEB is a global initiative focused on drawing attention to the economic benefits of biodiversity, including the growing cost of biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation. TEEB presents an approach that can help decision makers recognise, demonstrate and capture the values of ecosystem services and biodiversity. We had the privilege of hearing from Pavan Sukhdev, who was the study leader for TEEB's study, commissioned by the G8+5 and later hosted by the UK. He was appointed to lead this major project in March 2008 while at Deutsche Bank. Under his leadership, TEEB sized the global problem of biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation in economic and human welfare terms, and proposed solutions targeted at policymakers, administrators, businesses and citizens. In many ways, TEEB has brought biodiversity in from the cold and into the mainstream discussion. We also heard from Sir Robert Watson about how in Britain the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, supported the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which resulted in a model for assessing the state of biodiversity and overall condition of ecosystem services. Those of you from the UK will know that well. DEFRA's assessments showed that ecosystem services are critically important to human health, who would imagine, and well-being, and their market value is grossly understated. Also, non-market values are poorly understood, and decision-making at a strategic level is uninformed without this vital information as part of the mix in sustainable futures. We are at the process of developing a business case for a similar study to be undertaken in New Zealand. We are not in the business of putting a dollar figure on all biodiversity. However, if we can't speak in the language understood by decision makers, we will be forever considered a cost and not a vital investment. As you might imagine, drawing different value sets together is a powerful way forward, even though understanding the value of nature has not sat particularly comfortable with everyone. That is even more of a reason to advocate alongside business leaders for partnerships between government and industries for the concept of natural capital to succeed. These concepts underpin the New Zealand Treasury's work on living standards, which seeks to incorporate financial, human, social and natural capital into policy development and decision-making in government as an alternative to using straight GDP. If we can collaborate to bring together a compelling account of the state, trend and value of natural capital and the services that flow from it, bring that thinking into the corridors of New Zealand's economic reckoning and accounting, then we would be on our way to becoming indeed the greatest living space on Earth, and allaying the depressing degradation of plant species upon which our human survival depends. This is a positive story. I want to turn now to how in DOC we are focusing our work on maintaining and restoring the diversity of our natural heritage. The prioritisation system I talked about earlier is in place to set strategic priorities for our work in ecosystems. But we are also talking with communities about their local priorities to help us create a full picture of the work that needs to be done in each region. DOC has regional plans, conservation management strategies that enable communities to have their say about where DOC needs to work in their regions to guarantee that nationally threatened species are conserved to ensure persistence. In effect, these plans cover 1/3 of New Zealand. Local government and private landowners take care of much of the rest of them. Over 10,000 volunteers work on DOC projects each year. Additionally, thousands of community groups embark on restoration projects dear to their hearts all over New Zealand. In fact, a writer in the Dominion Post, I think it was this year or last year, called this phenomenon conservation, the latest new religion. The problem is, if only that were true, the problem is that where we have the least influence and relevance is in the areas of highest population. This is an opportunity for partnership that needs exploration amongst us. So what about botanical gardens in New Zealand? In the past, botanic gardens, and I say that with great fervour, in the past, botanic gardens were perceived as a reflection of the cultural significance of plants at the time as the gardens were set up. Here in New Zealand, the values of many botanic gardens reflected the values of 19th century English settlers, with many exotic species, including deciduous trees and conifers from the Northern Hemisphere, planted to remind settlers of where they had come from. And that's not surprising. Trees give a sense of place, and in setting up the gardens, many were reflecting the colonial heritage of the settlers. They were and are beautiful, calm, and a haven sometimes from the rigours of New Zealand's Indigenous landscapes. However, for some time, New Zealand botanic gardens have increasingly focused on native flora and its conservation, and public awareness of Indigenous biodiversity. In fact, this weekend I was reading on the plane down, a paper was published describing new species of native forget-me-nots. One of the authors was from the Auckland Botanical Gardens. I'm not sure whether she's here today. In Wellington, a good example is Atari Wilton's Bush, where we have more than 100 hectares of native bush very close to the centre of the city. It was started in 1860 when 7 hectares of forest was fenced off from stock. The area was expanded in 1926 by Leonard Cockayne to showcase New Zealand's native flora displayed in family groups or as recreated ecosystems representing different areas of New Zealand. Many other examples of these exist in New Zealand, and increasingly innovative approaches to gardens management are bringing plants and people together in refreshing ways throughout New Zealand. The role of botanical gardens in New Zealand society has indeed changed. For the Department of Conservation, our issues mostly relate to looking at remnants of Indigenous vegetation and their value to modern society. This is where modern botanic gardens have play a critical role as part of an integrated approach. Many botanical gardens are already intensively involved in supporting native plant conservation. There is much more to be done, and some of that could be done together. DOC is keen to think with you to pursue much broader aims than any of us could do by ourselves. As Sarah indicated, some examples of what's already occurring is insurance collections of threatened species, plants that are extinct in the wild or nearly so, reference collections of threatened plants for taxonomic and other research activities, propagation of plants for re-establishment in the wild, producing seeds in sufficient quantities for seed banking and for restoration projects, and advocacy collections, showcasing our rare and special plants and ecosystems, growing and displaying regionally threatened and distinctive plants. Enabling people to get up close and personal with Indigenous plants connects New Zealanders with their identity and demonstrates the uniqueness of these ecosystems and how valuable they are. A couple of examples of where botanical gardens are working closely with DOC are in this beautiful plant, the kaka beak. Two species, Cleanthus maximus and Cleanthus pernicious, both threatened nationally critical. Around 100 plants are left in the wild of Cleanthus maximus, which is the red species, but Cleanthus pernicious has been reduced to a single wild specimen. It's pink and white flowered. Both are well established in cultivation. Cleanthus maximus is generally preferred for horticulture because of its brighter flowers. Because of this, Cleanthus pernicious is gradually disappearing from our gardens. It is in serious peril, and botanic gardens could play a valuable role in ensuring that it survives. Another case is scurvy grass, Lepidium species, including Cook's scurvy grass and 10 newly named species. During his voyages of exploration, James Cook collected for food a Lepidium species to ward off the possible effects of vitamin C deficiency. Many of the 10 new species are from remote offshore islands and classified as threatened. They are susceptible to disease and attack from insect pests. All are notoriously difficult to maintain because they are prone to white rust. In some locations, Lepidium is the victim of the success of other conservation programs to restore forest, thereby reducing the habitat for scurvy grass, which is a great story. I'm sure kids would love to hear more about that. So how can DOC and botanical gardens work together? We need to have shared goals and objectives, and where possible, combine our efforts in plant conservation to get the best advantage from our respective knowledge and skills. A big issue, it seems, for botanical gardens is access to plant material. DOC is rethinking its permitting conditions to allow gardens to collect seeds and cuttings to benefit conservation programs. Also, some New Zealand botanic gardens may not be able to conduct their own research, but they could be well positioned to propagate and grow material for research projects, rehabilitation and reintroduction to the wild, as well as for ex situ collections. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, there is a lot of work already being done by gardens, but I'm wondering whether this could be expanded through greater collaboration. I expect that many ideas can be explored through the next several days, and many international colleagues have experiences that we can learn from. In many cases, taking plant conservation out of gardens and national parks into non-traditional urban spaces, rooftops, children's play areas, retirement homes, and downtown workplaces is where we may all need to be. In Wellington, and I'll talk to the Wellington people here, there is a wonderful opportunity for DOC, the Wellington Zoo, the Botanical Gardens, Atari and Zealandia to form a collaborative approach to education, exploration and research, with each of us playing to our strengths to achieve broader outcomes. DOC really wants to explore with Botanical Gardens how together we can make gains for plant conservation. Over the next few days, the Congress will hear, as we have done from Sarah, about the global strategy for plant conservation, and its objectives go to the heart of what we want to achieve. New Zealand's Department of Conservation has objectives that align with those of the global strategy. We are, to a large extent, on the same page. Botanic gardens have a vital role to play in meeting these objectives, and apart from the science that is urgently needed and the practical work on the ground that is overdue in some instances, there is an enduring need for a high level of communication and collaboration between all parties and communities to make sure that plant diversity is well understood and furthered. Once we have the people with us, it is far easier to engage politicians in the concept of better management of natural capital and its role in sustainable livelihoods and importance to all life on Earth. I'll leave you with one of my favourite threatened species to contemplate, which is the Pitostrum serpentinum, which is nationally critical and adorns the cover of our latest Plants Threats List report. It's only found in the Serval Cliffs, and you can ask Jeremy Rolfe all about what it's like to climb over the Serval Cliffs trying to find these little plants in North Cape. it's quite some way from here. There is only 130 of them or so, and they're in dire threat. But it is beautiful and it is worth saving. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felicity. DOC sounds like my kind of government department. And of course, you're quite right that many politicians know the price of everything and the value of nothing. So it's up to us to make sure that they know the value of ecological services and wild places.